I now call Daniel Johnson to be followed by Stuart McMillan in around 6 minutes. Mr Johnson.
The pandemic was perhaps the most extraordinary context and situation that any of us will ever have faced in our lives and will ever face again. Thousands of people lost their lives. So I'm very sorry, but that's not gossip. And I think to suggest that that's why this is being brought forward and being discussed by members of this Parliament is frankly casting aspersions on fellow members, and I reject as strongly as I can some of the assertions made by the previous member, because we have to understand what decisions were made, on the basis of what information and against what context, because the results of those decisions cost people's lives. Now, we've already heard from Alex Cole-Hamilton about the situation with the care homes. It was perhaps one of the most sensitive periods in the whole pandemic. Over 2,300 excess deaths occurred in care homes in 2020. And we were told time and time again that that decision in April was made because we didn't have knowledge. There was not the science to indicate that asymptomatic transmission may be possible or a significant risk. The problem with that is, if we look at the timeline of published science and published evidence, it doesn't hold up. On the 28th of January 2020, Jim McMenamin, an interim clinical director at the Health Protection Scotland, attended the second meeting of SAGE on COVID-19, and where it was stated there is limited evidence of asymptomatic transmission, but early indications apply some is occurring. On the 19th of February, the Japanese Institute of Infectious Diseases suggested asymptomatic transmission on the Diamond Princess, which subsequently resulted in other papers which went on to confirm that the majority of transmissions on the Diamond Princess were due to asymptomatic transmission. On the 5th of March, that was confirmed in the New England Journal of Medicine, one of the world's leading journals of medicine. That led, on the 9th of March, to the UK Health Minister, Lord Bethell, telling the Lord that large numbers of people, and I'm quoting, large numbers of people are infectious or infected but are completely asymptomatic and never go near a test kit. Quite simply, those sequences of scientific papers, stated positions in public bodies and indeed parliamentary committees contradicts and contrasts with the fact that the First Minister at the time and time again, said we did not have the knowledge. So quite simply, what we need to know is this. Was it the case that the government did not have that knowledge, was not looking at that information, at that science, or did it deliberately disregard it? And it's only by looking at the full context of decision-making we can really know that. We need to know whether those hyperlinks to those papers were being shared by officials and ministers within the government. We need to understand that context, because that's the only way we can really understand the nature of those decisions and the consequences that resulted. And let's also be clear, very briefly.
John Mason.
I thank the member for giving way, but we did know quite a lot at the time, and one of the things we knew was that hospitals in Italy were absolutely swamped with people, and it did seem to a lot of us, including I think members across the House, that getting people out of hospital had to be the priority.
The First Minister at the time said time and time again that we did not know that asymptomatic transmission was a risk. And I think we need to understand whether the government was taking cognizance of the latest science at the time or not. Yeah. But look, indeed.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
I'm very grateful if you can give him the time back, Presiding Officer. Daniel Johnson is quite right. The minutes of the COVID Advisory Committee of 20th of April 2020 couldn't be clearer. They say, at the one hand, that hospitals were screaming about asymptomatic transmission, and yet the same meeting was hearing about officials moving people out untested or tested positive into Scottish care homes. Those two things were known at the same time. We need to understand why that advice was ignored. Yeah.
Daniel Johnson, I'll give you the time back.
And indeed we do. And if those facts, if those points raised in those bodies were being discussed in WhatsApp groups, we need to know that. And quite frankly, right now we don't have the confidence as to whether or not they're going to be, because we have had government positions all over the place as to what would be released. We've had the First Minister saying that everything would be released, that there would be absolute open transparency, right the way through to the fact that messages were being routinely and systematically deleted. There is at best confusion. So to the heart of the motion here, we need an investigation as to whether or not, wittingly or unwittingly, the First Minister misled Parliament, because, frankly, all of us are profoundly confused as to what the government was retaining and on what basis. Because, again, the government is relying on dancing on the heads of pins on particular words. Time and time again, we hear about relevant information. But quite frankly and simply, it is up to the UK inquiry to decide what is relevant. Why doesn't the Scottish Government trust them? I simply don't understand. It's as though they expect the UK inquiry to break privacy rules, to break the law. They will look at what is handed over. They will judge whether it's relevant. They will judge whether it needs to be redacted. Why don't they trust them? But above all else, we all know in this chamber some simple truths about what happened. And we all know that government decision-making shrank to a very narrow number of ministers and close advisers. We all know that most of the time it was the First Minister and Deputy First Minister under close consultation with key special advisers. Now, I'm not saying that was necessarily the wrong thing to do. These were extraordinary times. It was a crisis. But we need to understand what happened. We need to understand whether that cost lives, because ultimately we need to learn the lessons. This will not be the last time this country faces a crisis. But unless we learn the lessons, lives will be lost again, needlessly, all because this government can't be transparent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Johnson. I now call Stuart McMillan to be followed by Craig Hoy, around 6 minutes. Mr McMillan.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Making easy political points is not what constituents want to see from their elected representatives. But let me finish. That's not what they want to see, particularly in a debate like this. So, Douglas Ross's opening comments, when he stated about not being party political in this, I would take him on his word at that particular point. But sadly, I think some comments, and certainly some of the barracking from his backbenches as the debate has went on, sadly has went against what Douglas Ross said in his opening comments.
Douglas Ross.
I'm grateful to Stuart McMillan for giving way, and I was genuine that this should be above party politics, which is why I think SNP members and Green members in the government should be independently minded and look at the facts. So can I ask him, looking at all of the details, does he believe the request from the UK COVID inquiry in February for all of the messages constituted a request for those messages, or does he agree with Shona Robeson that that only happened in September, just a few weeks ago?
Stuart McMillan, and give you the time back.
Thank you very much, Mr Ross. I think that the point of being relevant is really important in this. I'm sorry, Mr Ross, we'll have to agree to disagree. So, certainly...
Point of order, Daniel Johnson.
Presiding Officer, I seek your guidance. The standing orders are very clear in that we must treat each other with respect. So to cast aspersions on the motives and whether or not people are presenting facts and arguments on face value, surely members should respect that and actually consider that other members are speaking in good faith.
I thank Daniel Johnson for his point. I think the debate to date has been fairly respectful. I will intervene if I do not think that is the case.